This is On the Other Hand, a podcast sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas that explores politics and other issues of importance to Arkansans through conversations with community leaders. Stay with us as we talk to another leader in Arkansas who works across differences to get things done and to bring us closer together.
Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, April Chatham Carpenter, and I'm here today with my co-host, Glen White. And on our podcast, Glen and I interview community leaders in Arkansas who help work towards solutions across political or other divides, or who in some other ways reach across various divisions within our community. And Glen, I'm very excited about who we have today. So introduce our guest today.
Hi, April. I'm pretty excited too, and I think we're honored to be speaking here today with former Judge Wendell Griffen, who is an attorney, a retired judge, a CEO of his own organization, an author, a public speaker, and a pastor at the new Millennium Church in Little Rock. So he's a busy man. Wendell is also well known in Arkansas as a passionate advocate for various social justice issues. So welcome to On the Other Hand, Wendell.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you, April. It's good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
We're happy to have you. Let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe start with a brief look at your early life and how it led to the development of your own values, your career, and eventually the work you're doing now.
Thank you. I'm 71 years old. I'm a 1952 baby, September 23rd, 1952. So I'm a post-World War II baby. And I was born and raised in rural Southwest Arkansas, born in the town of Prescott in Nevada County, raised in Pike County, and attended segregated schools between the time I began first grade until the 10th grade. So, as you know, integration was invalidated in 1954, but I didn't begin going to school with white children until 1965. So there is that history. I had a very good foundation in education in the segregated schools. Despite the disparity in resources, the teachers were committed and compassionate and conscientious. They just didn't have the resources. For instance, I went through the entire ninth grade without a math book.
Wow.
So how do you learn algebra without a math book? And that was at a state school. Simmons High School was the black high school in Oklahoma, Arkansas, because there was no black high schools, no high schools for black children in Pike County. We were bused out of the county, or we had to move out of the county if we wanted to go to school past the 8th grade. I graduated from Delight High School in 1968, attended the University of Arkansas, University of Arkansas in 1973 with a degree in political science, was an ROTC cadet and a distinguished military graduate. So I began my military service in May of 1973. Served 3 years in the Army, resigned my commission to go to law school, was honorably discharged and went to law school and got a law degree from the University of Arkansas in 1979. I was in law school between 1976 and 1979. Moved to Little Rock with my wife, Dr. Patricia Griffen, in 1979, and we've been here ever since. We have 2 adult sons, and we just became the happy grandparents of a beautiful baby girl.
Congratulations. Let me ask you, if you can, just briefly, can you look back a little bit at your early life, the way you were raised, the environment, the experiences? What about those early times led to the development of some of your central core values, would you say?
The central values I got from my childhood, Glenn, were basically the inherent dignity of every person, regardless of background, regardless of occupation, regardless of their social situation. There was a saying in the community where I grew up, came out of our church life: there are no big I's and little U's before God. Everyone is equal. And I was taught by my parents and the elders in my community that every person in the community not only was valued, but was also valuable. Not only valuable for what they could give, but also valuable for what they meant. And so you could learn from every person, regardless of what his or her background was, education, and so forth. Thirdly, I learned a strong commitment to knowledge, to education. My father had an eighth grade education. My mother had a high school education, but they were avid readers. My grandmother was domestic. My paternal grandmother was a domestic worker in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. But she worked for a family that the father was a pharmacist, and they had the Reader's Digest condensed books for their only child. My grandmother took the used Reader's Digest books and brought them to me. And that was my avenue to the world. That was my avenue outside Pike County, outside segregation, outside the United States for that matter, because reading fiction or works of fiction or condensed works from other people, from other communities, gave me a sense for the world bigger than Pike County, bigger than segregation, bigger than the United States.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let me address this with you. Now, in our podcast, one of the central things we try to do is to talk with community leaders who in some way have shown a willingness to reach across various divisions, whether they be political or something else. Personally, I've come to appreciate it when we start talking about guests. Everyone does that to some degree. Everyone has a story to tell and in how they reach across across the aisle or some other source of division. Now, in your case, based on media coverage I have seen over the years, I suspect some people might see you as very much a strong advocate for issues that they identify largely with the left side of the political spectrum. And therefore, some folks might discount your willingness to engage with others who have different beliefs. So I wonder if you could help us understand how you in particular place value on working with others who are different from you and the importance of compromising with those people.
Certainly, Glenn. I have a strong sense of social justice that was given to me from my childhood by my parents, and I am a disciple of the religion of Jesus, an avid follower of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Many people would, and I, in my adult years after I became a minister, became a good follower of Dr. James Cone, who's an Arkansas native, who is the father figure of academic Black theology. I have also an active mind. It is a very small person who cannot think outside his or her own head, who cannot reason that there is more to be learned from what one finds other people know than one can know oneself. And one only knows how sharp one's own mind is by to the extent that one engages in discourse with people who hold other views. Iron sharpens iron. You don't make iron from butter knives. And so we get our best thinking when our thinking is questioned, our views are challenged, our belief systems are disputed. At the same time, one has to know what one believes and why, and have to have the intellectual honesty and the breadth of character to recognize, even though one holds views strongly and has held those views for a long time, only the dead don't change their minds. The sign of a living person or the living organization is the capacity to change. And that's true of organic as well as inorganic matter. And so I encourage change. I read actively. I have an active reading habit because, as I mentioned, reading was how I came to realize how other people live, other people think, other people reason. Finally, I think it is very important to know that what Mark Twain said is very true. It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
Amen. I like that one. That's one of my favorite quotes by Mark Twain. You mentioned about one of the things that influenced you early was the teachings of Jesus. And so this brings up kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask you. You are a pastor of a Christian church, a follower of Jesus. How would you describe to folks who may not be clear on this, how your strong advocacy in our community for social justice is consistent with Christian principles? And I think that's an especially important question now because, as we know, there are some Christian churches these days who seem to have fairly negative views of some of the current social justice work and ideas.
I'm glad you asked that question. First of all, I like to remind people that you cannot have an intellectually honest understanding about the religion of Jesus if you don't recognize that he was what one might be called a self-taught rabbi. He did not go to rabbinical school. He did not come from rabbinical class. He was a rabbi of the people, and he identified with the common folks. He was not a temple rabbi. He was a street preacher, if I can use that term.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, we have to understand that the religion of Jesus heralds back to the Hebrew prophets who always had a keen sense that love of God and love of neighbor required concern for the least among these. Jesus talked about that in Matthew 25, that the vital signs of a society is not how well the most affluent and most comfortable are doing. It is how well the society is caring for those that just call the least among us. Thirdly, the capacity to recognize that the value of every person is inherent, regardless of his or her religious belief system or social status, is a fundamental part of the religion of Jesus. I like to distinguish the religion of Jesus from what I call Constantinian Christianity. It's not just my term. It's a term in religion, Constantinian. We like to remember that, or I like to use the term imperial Christianity. It is the Christianity of the empire. What we see passing now for Christianity in so-called right-wing churches, I don't call them religious right because you can't, I don't call them Christian right because you can't be Christian and hateful and be right. You can't be a follower of Jesus, hate women, hate people who are disparage people who are immigrants. Jesus was the immigrant in chief, according to the religious scriptures. He came from the farthest distance and was among us. You can't be disparaging for people who are unhoused. Jesus had no permanent address. Jesus did not have a bank account we know about. He didn't have a post office box. He had to borrow a donkey to get into Jerusalem the last time he came there. So the idea that we would have a religion that calls itself the religion of Jesus, that takes its basic strength on the compass of the affluent, on the idolatry of greed, on love of war. Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers. And he wasn't talking about buying the biggest gun. He was talking about having the capacity to love and resolve differences non-violently. And so that is an important thing. I like to remind people, I don't call myself a Christian, not because I have any problem with Jesus, but because the religion of Jesus has been so misrepresented, misconstrued, and mishandled across time that it has now become identified as the religion of hate. My next book is titled The Hateful Faithful.
Wow.
And the threat of fascism, religious nationalism, and neo-fundamentalism, free market fundamentalism, to democracy in the United States and the world. We are seeing that now. And so I like to talk about that, not to suggest that the people who hold different views are people to be despised. They are simply people with whom I disagree. And just like folks who have the wrong time on their watch. They have a watch and they have a right have believe their watch is right. But I have as much right to say, you know what? You have the right to believe your watch is right, but if the meeting starts at a time and your watch is wrong, you're late when you show up.
That's interesting. That I appreciate all of that. That's a very well spoken kind of defense from where you're coming from. Well, before April has a couple of questions for you, I just want to clarify something. Did you talked about Constantinian Christianity? You also referred to it as what?
Imperial Christianity.
Imperial Christian. Okay.
Yeah, Constantine, you recall, was the emperor of Rome who, in the fourth century of the Christian era, supposedly converted to Christianity and was baptized. The Roman Empire had not been able to persecute the followers of Jesus into extinction. They hadn't been able to crucify them. They hadn't been able to torture them. They hadn't been able to run them out of Rome. As a matter of fact, the Christian movement, the religion of Jesus movement, was growing. It was a diverse. It was an inclusive. It was a socially engaging movement. And the only thing that Constantine could figure out how to do it. Understand, he had the Roman Empire. He had the Roman allegiance. The only way he could figure out how to do it was to capture it, co-opt it. And so Constantine claimed that he converted to Jesus and established the religion of Jesus as the religion of the realm, the Holy Roman Empire. Recall?
Mm-hmm.
And from that, we get the Crusades. From that, we get the notion that the religion of Jesus is the empire. We don't understand that the religion of Jesus through the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church came up with this thing called the doctrine of discovery, which said that any lands discovered by people who were Christian, where the people were not Christians, were pagan lands, and the people there were savages, and if they did not convert to Christianity, they could be exterminated. War could be taken on them unless they converted. That is not the religion of Jesus. That's imperial. That's the religion of empire.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
That happened in the U.S. too with the indigenous populations.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
It's happened in every April. It's happened in every society where the religion of imperial Christianity has gone to indigenous societies. In Asia, in Africa, in India, in China, in the Americas, everywhere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it's and coming from a perspective that in my own faith background, the whole idea of evangelism is an interesting concept. That's not one of the things that we were supposed to talk about today, but I've just been thinking about it as you've been talking about, and how do we become, whatever our faith background is, wanting to spread what we consider to be the good news to others in a way that still respects who they are. And I don't know, how you do that. And I'm curious if your book, The Hateful Faith, that you're going to be coming out with, is dealing with any of those kinds of issues as well.
I do want to talk about that. Evangelism has become a bad word because evangelism has been misconstrued. People talk about the Great Commission, the so-called Great Commission. First of all, Jesus never talked about the Great Commission. The Great Commission is not mentioned in Scripture. That's not necessarily bad. I mean, the notion of the Trinity is not mentioned in Scripture either. But Jesus said, "Go, teach, and make disciples." A disciple is someone who learns from a teacher. A disciple is not someone who simply has headspace. A disciple is someone who learns how to become and how to follow the ways of life of a mentor. Evangelism at its best and truest is mentoring, showing how love works, how love of God works, how love of neighbor works. And you can't show people that you love God and love neighbors by killing them. You can't show them that you love God and love neighbors by invading them. You can't do that by enslaving them. And you can't do that by dehumanizing them or by exploiting them, whether they're women, whether they're LGBTQ people, whether they're immigrants, whether they are people from a different religions. You cannot love God and love other people by being oppressive. Evangelism is not religious chauvinism, nor is it religious hegemony. It is simply mentoring. And the best evangelism, for instance, at the congregation I serve, we don't sing 5,000 stanzas of just as I am and open doors of the church and say, hey, come, no. We say, listen, you are part of this congregation if you want to grow with us and be part of our community. Check us out, experience the community. And if the community works for you, then we accept you. We haven't voted anybody in because, quite frankly, we want to build community. That's what evangelism is. Now, imperial religion is not about mentoring, it's about manufacturing. And imperialism is the software. I'm borrowing from a Palestinian theologian named Mitri, capital M-I-T-R-I, Raheb, capital R-A-H-E-B. Brilliant theologian who reminds us that every imperial religion has required two things: software and hardware. And in imperial religion, for every empire in the Christian era, the software has been the Bible. And the hardware has been military. Guns. And when you look at what's going on in this country, the gun culture and the church culture are almost so hand in hand that it's disheartening. We even have churches that are blessing folks bringing their guns. And I haven't ever seen very many churches that haven't prayed for every war. We rarely see churches, just Jesus said, blessed are peacemakers, but we rarely see churches saying, listen, we are going to oppose this war because it is unloving. It is a land grab. It is oppressive. It's going to create widows and orphans, and it's going to devastate populations. It's going to devastate, ecosystems. Those conversations have to be had in a civil way, but they are necessary. Otherwise, religion becomes, how do I put it? Religion becomes perverted, contaminated, distorted, and it becomes unhealthy. It becomes toxic, hence hateful faith.
So when is your book coming out? Just curious.
I have manuscript in large part. I hope to get the manuscript to publishers later this year.
Okay.
And we'll see if a publisher wants to pick it up.
You have another book out that you've also written. Is this a follow-up to that book, or do you see it as completely different?
Well, it is a continuation or a follow-up of two other books I've written. One, the first book I wrote in 2017 was The Fierce Urgency of Prophetic Hope, published by Judson Press. I wrote that on the aftermath of the 2006 election of Donald Trump. How do we think of hope, and what does hope mean, prophetic hope, as we're wrestling with the election of Donald Trump? The most recent book, which came out in last October 1st, is co-authored with South African theologian Alan Boesak, capital B-O-E-S-A-K, my friend from South Africa, who's a liberation theologian, good friend of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. And it's titled Parables, Politics, and Prophetic Faith. They're up they're close by each other in my library. But Hateful Faithful is one that I have been musing about even when I was writing the first one, because I was seeing that what Michi Rahab says about software and toxic religion is true, whether it's how we treat women or immigrants or people of color, or how we treat LGBTQ persons, or how we even treat people from other religious groups or no religion. It's hateful faith. And when you weaponize hateful faith and you commercialize it, when you industrialize it through the evangelism system, mass marketing, you have a toxic situation that's destroying the world. So we have climate change and people are destroying the climate and saying, hey, I don't care.
Yeah.
Jesus is coming back. I don't care. I don't care.
That's what we're looking for. Yeah. So I'm just looking at the questions that we're planning on asking you, and there's another question that I'll ask you, and then I'll turn it back over to Glen. I know, Glen, I'm getting out of order of what we were planning on doing, but it is what it is. So I think about so much of what we encounter that's related to this. And much of it is religious differences that have come into politics. Differences between religious and non-religious folks, or conflicts across religions, even, what's happening in the Middle East right now. And, you were even talking about conflicts within Christianity over essential elements, maybe of how we do things. So I'm curious about, how do we move towards some degree of reconciliation between us, whether it be the religious versus the non-religious folk, or conflicts across religions, or even conflicts within Christianity? Thoughts on that based on your reading and writing?
April, I believe we have to understand that, and Martin Luther King's last book puts it very well. The title puts it very well. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Those are the options. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And those are our options. We can either grow the chaos or we can build community, but we can't do both together. You cannot build a community in chaos, and you cannot retain chaos and try to build community. One is always the end of the other. What we have to begin with is a sense of our common identity, our mutuality. Whether you're faithful or not, whether you know that, think background, whatever your social construct may be, you breathe the same air. Your body needs the same water to live. If you get cut, you bleed. If you don't heal from your bleeding, you die. You die and your loved ones grieve. Your loved ones' tears contain the same elements. There is no distinction. And if we do not recognize that if we treat each other in ways that create more tears for other people, simply because we don't look alike or pray alike or pray at all, or we love alike, then we are dishonoring their humanity, and we are disempowering our own capacity to build community.
I'd like for you to define two things, and I'll turn it back over to Glen. You mentioned the community and chaos. You've mentioned community before, but not everybody may have the same definition of community. So if you could define community and also what you mean by chaos.
Community is, as the word means, common and unity. That we have a united sense of the common destiny, common decency, and common humanity of every person. And I would add every creature in the creation. That I have a responsibility to love and honor the earth as well as I love and honor my own parents. And I have to do that because I have to live in unity with the earth. That common unity is how we build community. Chaos is what happens when you disregard community and you act not in common, but at the expense of others, in disregard for others, for whatever reason. And that chaos happens. Chaos is not a natural condition. Chaos is a malady. It is not healthy.
Thanks for joining us today on our edition of On the Other Hand, the first part of our conversation with Wendell Griffen. Be sure to check out the second part of the conversation with Wendell, as well as other podcast episodes of On the Other Hand. You can find those on the podcast page of the Braver Angels website at arkansas.braverangels.org or on many popular podcast sites.
When you visit our website, in addition to links to all our episodes, you'll also find a link to email us at otherhandar@gmail.com. And you can use that to send us feedback about the program or suggest any speakers or topics.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, Glen White
And April Chatham Carpenter.
Let's each do our part to bring our community closer together.